You're listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast series that syndicates for the A-List Online, and my name is Andrew Mackay-Smith. The interview subject I've got prepared for you on this episode of the podcast series is David Moran from the Perth outfit The Date. The reason for the conversation is to talk about the number of singles that the band had released so far this year, but you know what? We went right off track, and that is a beautiful thing. We talk about a whole heap of other stuff, which is very interesting and very pertinent to the world around us today. So let's have a listen to what David has to say. Here we go.
Good evening.
Hey, David, it's Andy Mackay-Smith calling for our chat. How you going?
Good, Andy. How are you?
Mate, plugging away, actually. You're my last interview of the evening. So it's been a
Nice.
solid night of interviews. Great stuff. I love talking to the artists that Lee sends through to me that get distributed by Firestarter, because honestly, I can genuinely say this. I haven't had a bad interview subject yet, and I reckon I've interviewed about 40 or 50 from the stable of Firestarter artists, if you can call it that. So there you go.
Nice. Well done. Yeah, good result. Did you get one or two tonight, or have you had a broad batch from different areas?
Mainly with Firestarter, of course, is over in Perth. Is that where you guys are based as well, over in Western Australia? Yeah.
Yep.
I reckon I must hold some sort of a record from a podcasting perspective of talking to the most artists from Western Australia out there on the web, because it's just I just love Western Australian music as a consequence of it. I said it earlier tonight, but I genuinely have not heard anything from Perth or Western Australia broadly, because they're not always from Perth. But I haven't found, in terms of a track or an album or an EP, whatever it might be, a release. Let's just call it a release, where I haven't found something I've liked about it. You know what I'm saying? Nothing where I've sort of put it on and just wanted to turn it off, which, to be honest with you, it sometimes happens. You know that? But
I do understand that.
Yeah.
It's and I guess over here we are doing the best we can to keep it original. I think that's the key to what we do.
One of the conversations tonight was, sorry, I'll just make this point because I think it's an important one, is that you've got the whammies over there, and I think that really helps, okay, because it's something to aspire to winning. And we've got, I can't remember what it's called over here, Big Sound. It used to be called Big Sound. It's probably got another name these days. You know, they change their names all the time for God knows whatever reason. But
branding, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's not like a Queensland Music Awards or a Brisbane or a Gold Coast. I mean, to be honest, there might be, but I certainly don't know about it. And if I'm over here and I've heard of the whammies, you know they're a big deal. You know.
Yeah, true. Very true.
And I think that helps. I think just having that there helps, because it's something that you can say to people when the going gets tough. Look, hey, you know, we've got a great single here, we've got a great track here, or a great album here. How about we put in the effort and we actually try to win something here with it? And like, it's remember you just, I hate to judge a book by its cover, but looking at the photos of you guys on Facebook, you're around about my age, in your 40s, if I'm not mistaken.
True that.
Well, but you know what I'm saying. So you remember the 90s? Remember what they were like when the Arias, when Daniel Johns and Peter Garrett and you almost got the feeling that Tex Perkins and what's his name from UMI? Sorry, I can't remember his name at the moment. Timmy Rogers. It was almost like, they weren't that keen on winning the awards, were they? They'd sort of get the awards and like, oh yeah, it's pretty good, but I'd rather my footy team win on the weekend. And it was like, guys, come on, you know, I'm a musician.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's also a bit there where, you know, there's a path that you can tread if you want to, and it's fairly broad. Like, it's not any particular style. You can throw your hat in the ring, and you know, there's enough categories and enough interest every year to keep people entertained, which is, you know, what we're here for. Agreed. So it certainly does sort of lead the people and give them a direction. And I guess a lot of artists that I see or who we play with, they never release an album, or they only release one, but it takes them 10 years. And it's that concept that you can sit on something for way too long. You know, if you can see the whammy, you could actually, I'll do one this year, I'll do one next year, I'll do one next year. And the more you do, the better you get.
Yeah.
You know, there's no denying that from a songwriting point of view. You know, that concept from years ago when I paint my masterpiece, it's an ongoing masterpiece. You know, it's every time you write a new song or release a new album, you know, the next one, in my opinion anyway, gets better. You know, you've learned that more of your craft. That it just constant learning, and that's, you know, that to me is the key of this whole music business.
Very good philosophy. Yeah, great philosophy there.
It drives us, you know, like we release regularly, and that's why, because we have the tracks, we have the songs, we write, we enjoy the craftsmanship. And I was saying to the guitarist and Rob, you know, it's, you know, this whole album that Cycle we're doing at the moment just gets better and better. You know, it's and we're moving into areas we didn't contemplate, and you know, from a technical point of view, I guess, in the tracking, mixing, mastering sphere, that before we just played and be damned. Whereas now it's like, okay, we should actually know about this.
That's
it's
so
broad.
true.
Even, you know, artwork. What does artwork do? What does branding do? What does all of that do to you as an artist, to you as a band? And you start to learn about it. And it doesn't mean you got to follow every trend, but it certainly means that you got to understand what it is that's out there and work towards what you really want to achieve. So, yeah, it's good.
Yeah, there's a lot of, God, it goes without saying, there's a lot of maturity in what you're saying there. Meaning that you've been there and done that, and you've figured it out. But it's,
yeah.
But isn't it interesting?
This is the 7th album, man.
But isn't it interesting that I'm at uni these days, so I'm in my 40s, as I've mentioned, and I'm at uni, and I'm lapping it up, man. Believe me, I don't remember the last time I was at uni was 1996, and I bloody hated it. But isn't it interesting the maturity what maturity gives to you, which is that there's a lot of value in things that when you're a kid you don't see value in. You know, I'm learning how to use Photoshop and Premiere Pro these days, and man, even probably 10 years ago, if you put that in front of me, you would have said, I'm not going to learn this shit. But here I am. I'm like the classic mature age student sitting up the front of the class, absorbing everything and taking all of the notes because I don't want to miss any of it.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the concept that, you know, youth is wasted on the young, isn't it? Because it's like,
oh my God, so true. Yeah,
we go through all that period of where we could be brilliant and we should be brilliant, but we squander it in the name of, you know, freedom or whatever it is we're looking for. And then all of a sudden you turn around that corner and you think, you know what, I could do better. And away you go. You know, it's good. It's a lease of life, I guess. And some people buy themselves fast cars and some people get themselves snazzy haircuts, and the rest of us just, you know, strap it on and play rock and roll.
Yeah.
So it's it's a good life.
Yeah, youth is the young fella I was talking to before you was only 18 from a band called Joey Heaven. Anthony, I give props to him. He was 18 and very mature young man. Got a great head on young shoulders, or old head on young shoulders. Sorry, I'll get it out there eventually. But even at uni too, I'm around some of the 17, 18, and 19-year-olds, but they're smart as, you know, they're sharp, which is great, but to me, that's the anomaly, you know, about youth being wasted on the young. Like, they are sharp, but I'm in a learning environment, a core learning environment where you have to be mature to get through. But a lot of the youth out there, it's not about being these days. It's always been like that. God help me, I was probably like it myself if someone in their 40s was observing me back in the mid-90s when I was sort of 17, 18, 19. But, yeah, you've got all of the energy, but you don't know what the hell to do with it. And you don't realise the older you get, energy just gets vacuumed off, doesn't it? Just disappears.
Oh, I think you focus it, don't you? You could do 15 tasks today, or you could do one really well. You know, and that's where we are we focus on what we do. We craft. That's our life. You know, it is how we approach everything. And I think that a lot of the youth that are on it are guided. You know, they've got that maturity that comes from having someone telling them how it is and how it could be, letting them make the choice, and then they own it. And a lot of them won't listen, and I don't think I would have. I don't think I did. But, you know, if you can push them, I guess, to say, and that goes back to your original statement about the whammies, that's the beauty of it. You know, that says, look, you could be that person. Here's not so much the criteria, but here's some steps to get there. See how you go, and that's better than just being wandering, you know, aimless. Where what do I do? Do I turn up for a gig? Do I drink afterwards? Do I drink before? You know, or am I actually going to a gig for a reason? am I delivering when I get there? Is it a focus? Have I got something to say? And that's where they start to have the focus. And it is a bit rinse, wash, repeat. But at the same time, that's how you get good. Yeah. That's the crafting, isn't it? You just you learn, you make a mistake, or you do something that you could have done better. I think that's how I look back at it now. As I go, it was all part of getting here, but gee, I could have done that one better. That could have been tighter. Too many words. I didn't need as many. Needed another gap, a pause there. That's a reflection.
Yeah, you never stop learning, do you? And what you just articulated then is the methodology to getting better and to improving, and it's a constant process. It's never never stagnant, never static, never stays in one spot. In many ways, and this is so true, and I've heard so many musicians talk about this. If you equate music with art, the art is abandoned. Meaning that you take it to a point where you just go, I think I've got it to a point that I can take it to right now, given this is a snapshot in my life. Like albums, they're snapshots in musicians' lives. That's what they are. And it's one of those things where I think that ultimately you've got to take an artist's overall catalogue into consideration when you're critiquing their work, not focus on one album. Because then you can see the ebbs and the flows and sort of equate an album to what's going on in their life. I think Paul McCartney's a really good example of that. You can hear, some of the Ram stuff, Wing stuff. Sorry, isn't that good, to be honest with you? And you think that was when he was really comfortable, if you like, and was sort of settled into a bit of a groove, and there wasn't a lot of challenge there. And I saw him recently.
Yeah, but millions of people would say you're wrong there. Millions of people that
Paul McCartney, sure, yeah.
No, well, you know what I mean? Like, they would go, those are the same people that dance into Dancing Queen. They took that Paul McCartney period that, did that have the Roll, the smoking song in it from memory? Something, Ram. Not Roll Another One, but one of those. It sort of was that, I think that songs bookmark events in people's life. And, that concept that you hear a song and you're instantly back there. Whatever that is.
That's very true.
If you had Space Truckin' by Deep Purple and you were out the back with your denim jacket and your King Brown, you'll never forget that. It's that bit, and I guess that's where people, I know a lot of people probably wouldn't appreciate the style of music we do because they don't want to work as hard as we may push them lyrically. In other words, here's a message, people. And they actually don't want that. They want to just, think about sunlight and, driving in their car. And that's the Wings period, as opposed to Helter Skelter, which is different again. And I think that's where, as you say, as you work through a person's catalogue, you can see where they're at personally, and other people check into that and go, yeah, I really like that. That's where I'm at personally too. And that's a connection. But it obviously helps if you're a great songwriter because you can just scattershot as many different styles as long as it's not cold reggae anywhere you want.
So let's talk about your music then, because the two cuts that I've got are very different from one another. Okay, so there's Candidate, which I had a good laugh about the cover on that one. It looks like first I didn't have a close look at it. I just saw it on my phone, and what I thought it was, I thought you'd been ironic about it, and you'd melted one side of ScoMo's face, but it was bloody Bill Shorten. And I thought,
yeah, so that's ScoShow. And that was a deliberate. So what's happened is we're throwing a track out at last day of the month for the year. So every month we throw one out, and
good on you.
The spread of the tracks is based around the overall arc is called Premeditated, and it's saying what happens and what drives the movement of people around this planet. And some people move because they want to, and some people move because they're forced to. And if they're forced to, is it economic? Is it political? Is it climate? What forces them? And obviously, at the moment, the timing of it was such that the track, Candidate and the one before, which was Watergate, both were political, and we did align those, even though we had them all in the bag ready to go. we sort of aligned them with the election and all of that. And its candidate itself was really based around, it doesn't matter who the leader is, they're basically there to look after the Australian people or any people. And on top of that, their messages are reasonably similar. They have to be. You know, they've got to be about health. They've got to be about education. They've got to be about infrastructure, because that is what we need. Then there's the next layer down that says their message is not really their message. It's their party's message. And what happens to that guy who's out there spruiking it every day, ends up in his hotel room and looking in the mirror thinking, God, is this me? And what happens when he goes home to his wife? Does he actually tell her the truth about the message, or does he carry the message back to the family even though he knows it's a lie? So it was a fairly broad sort of stab at the folks that probably lie more than we want them to, and I guess it doesn't really benefit anyone, but a paycheck's a paycheck. So I guess we had to call them out on that one.
Politics is such a weird game, isn't it? Because you've got to be fake.
Yeah.
You can't be genuine in politics.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah. That last line is that really, really real, that's me. Really real, won't you believe?
It's so bizarre. And I think a lot of, you'll never get any, the people that you get in politics just, they have the ability to stand in front of people and deliver a message, whether that be a camera or a big audience. That's really the only thing that separates them from a regular person. And, of course, you've mentioned it, the ability to maybe not tell the truth. I'm not saying lying, but, not really deliver a message that is factual.
Well, not the whole truth.
Not the whole truth. There you go. Yeah.
They've got a message, stay on point. That's what they're told. And I think, I mean, it's not a particularly easy life, but at the same time, it's not a qualified life. You know, you've got, as they say, I think it was Warren Zevon, lawyers, guns and money. So you've got people who are qualified for various areas in life. As a politician, very rarely are they qualified at any level, except in, as you say, in public speaking.
Yep.
And that's a dangerous thing, because it doesn't allow them to actually talk at a level. And in the past, some of the politicians have obviously gone through university and picked up what they wanted, and maybe even ended up with that portfolio. You know, there's a little bit there where, you know, you can't be as good as some of the guys who are behind the money or behind the community policies and not understand it. But at the same time, the majority come and go, and there's no love, there's no support. Like in a band, you help each other and you work together. Whereas in politics, you know, even it would appear they don't even work for their own party. Half the time they're just probably working for themselves.
Well, I think you touched on an important point there, which is that there's an element of self-interest, or a serious or significant element of self-interest when you become a politician. It's a strange gig, isn't it? I mean, you are in the public spotlight, everything you say will be scrutinised, yet people seem to be drawn toward it. Who the hell would want to do it? Really? I mean, it's such a strange paradigm.
But I think power is one of those interesting things. You've got power and you've got money. And I think the politicians some of them really enjoy the power that it gives them and the privilege and I guess the standing in society. And the money's not too bad, and that's a real driver, I believe, because obviously if you're in power, you're making more than if you're on the backbenches. So staying in power, there's anyone that can increase their paycheck. Obviously, it's a driver. So, and obviously that's me from a distance looking at it and being a little bit like tongue in cheek on all of this stuff, because, you know, for us, humour and music is essential. But I do look at them and, you know, having seen a few of them pass me by in life, there's definitely no doubt that when they get off the campaign, there is no difference between them and us. And in some ways they wouldn't want it any other way, but in other ways it just means that everything that they are for their day job is really just, you know, it's putting on the makeup and the slap and getting out there and spruiking, you know. And it's like we used to do the, you know, snake oil medicine seller. It's the same guys, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Politics is a lot of snake oil. That's really what it is, and it's talking to people who are are really partisan about their politics. You know, they're dyed-in-the-wool left or right. And you think, isn't that interesting? So you completely close yourself off from what the other side's got to say, and it's not necessarily about the other side. It's about the ideas. It's about the adaptation of ideas. And it's like these days I find more than any other time in our lives, it's like if you're on the right, you believe in these key points, and if you're on the left, you believe in all of these key points, and there's literally no room for movement. And because it's like this, it's like a football team. Or like you support, like, you know, I support the West Tigers, for example. There are some players on the team I don't like, and so this is a broad comparison I'm drawing here. So work with me here. You know what I'm saying, okay?
I do.
Yeah,
but also, it's where does it come from? You know, is it coming from? Most of it's hereditary, I think. You know, it's like you grow up in the family, and everyone supports West Tigers, therefore you do. You know, you grow up in the bush and you're supporting the Nationals. So, and if your father's a union man, you'll probably support Labor. And I guess that's what they work on. But again, we have to pull it back and say, well, they're there to support us. They're there to guide the country. They're there for us to ensure we've got, you know, housing, electricity, food, all the basics, clean water. That's what they're there for, no matter whether you're what side of politics. And we certainly would never go to a side of politics. It's all about ensuring that those guys are accountable and that they're looking after us, all of us. You know, it doesn't really matter who you are, where you're from, or how you paddle. It really is all about them making sure that we're all doing the best we can, and it's not about them lining themselves. So there's a little bit there where that's the off-putting side, the ugly politics where they found to have, and you know, if you, I guess on Waterdays at site, there's a line in there that it's 50s in the hole, and that says it all when they do, and they always do get found out to be feathering their nest. You know, that's
in Australia,
really
definitely.
distasteful.
Yeah, that's what I love about us here in Australia is that we're very distrustful naturally of politics and politicians. The regular person, it's really hard. Apart from the youth, you know, there's a lot of idealism in youth, right? But particularly people our age, I find it's really rare to meet somebody that's a dyed-in-the-wool left or right. We really have a healthy cynicism of what goes on with the political process because we do know that there are a lot of people that are basically attention seekers, and they are about feathering their own nest when they go into politics. And it's important, I think, from an Australian perspective, for us to keep that attitude going, because I think it keeps literally what the Democrats, the Australian Democrats I'm talking about, Don Chip's party, it keeps the bastards honest.
Yeah, and this is what Waterdate's about. This is what Candidate's about. Those songs are saying, don't keep your eye off them. These guys need to be maintained because they're only human and they're probably not really good examples of humanity. You know, they're easily led, and and I think there's a saying, obviously, power corrupts, and I think they start to believe themselves and their branding yet again. You know, that I can do this, I'm in charge of that, I've got this. You know, what's wrong with going up to Thailand and, you know, having Thai Tuesday? And it really does get to that point. Well, there's a lot wrong with that.
Yeah, they're out of touch.
And you need to be called out on it, and we are going to call you out on it because, you know, but saying that, there's also another level where, you know, people own newspapers, and newspapers also spruik policy, and newspapers don't always talk honestly. So, you know, it's reflective across society, and everyone's trying to get to a point where they can, you know, make what they can. You know, and again, there's a line in the song that, you know, if you can make it, you can take it. And that seems to be a theme for where they're at. How can they get away with it? How long they get away with it? You know, the expenses, I'm just going to fly the family down to the grand final. Don't mind if I do. I'll sign that off. You know, and then there's such a surprise. Oh, I didn't realise I had to let you know. You know, and it's like, mate, like, which part of, like, there's, you know, checks and balances don't you understand, buddy? So we, as long as we're calling them out, and again, what we do in our music is, and especially with this album, is really look at all of that, the next set of songs is about, it's probably a little bit of a harder line. We've had Inundated has came out at the end of May, and on Sunday we're putting out Accommodate. And, Accommodate is a lot tougher song. It's about what happens when it all goes wrong and people are selling, in this case, a ride on a boat across an ocean. And the opening line is there's numbers on the coffin, because I saw an image of quite a lot of coffins lined up, and they just had numbers on them. No one knew who these people were. They'd tried to get across on a boat, hadn't worked out so well. They got picked out of the ocean, and no one knew who they were. And yet, someone made the money. It's the same deal. Someone pocketed it.
Is that the Christmas Island thing?
Statement.
Is that the Christmas Island thing you're talking about?
In general, all of it. Yeah. There's been untold. And then you look at Italy. You look at all around the globe. That's what I'm saying. This is a global thing at the moment. That's what we're saying. Why do people move? And all the way through, it's greed. It's, people are making money out of the movement of people, and those people are just commodities. It's like, how do we make some money? So there's a line in Accommodate that says the numbers on the statement are not the statement of mate. In other words, we bank that money, but, in public we'd never mention that we'd just send a boatload of people in an old junk out and hope like hell they got there but didn't really care because we went home for dinner.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's, where the theme is there. The theme says that if people have to move, and at a high level, we're pushing the thought process that if you come from a country and you go to another country where physically you're not made for it. I myself would struggle in many countries around the world physically, and, people over there who, if you are, born and bred, 100th generation Icelandic, how hard would it be to live in Alice Springs? And, just from a physicality, what happens? Like, when you're actually pushed, you don't have a choice and you're trying to survive. But at the same time, it's such an extreme. People, Afghanistan, Sudan, all of that, they're moving. There's this week, 70 million people have been displaced, and as in that's the total.
Which country is that in? Is that in
officially? No, that's in general. That's the figures right now. 70 million people have been displaced.
Did you say
and
this
the top
this
five
week?
Are,
Did you say
no,
this?
No, this week it came out. Sorry,
Oh, okay,
this week
okay,
it came
gotcha.
out.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
So being that there's upwards of 140,000 a year, at times a lot more, but it depends where Sudan, Afghanistan, all of that. It's just phenomenal. This is and they turn up. And how do they assimilate? How do they do it? And this is the message again. It's like, look at what's going on, people. And don't get me wrong, I don't have the answer, but most of it is political. It's come back. They were doing well. If you look at Venezuela, Zimbabwe, all of these countries were doing fantastically. Food bowl of Africa, oil rich, and in the middle of it, there's some politicians. There's a theme here, isn't there? It's like, it is dirty deals, and nowadays they have nothing. And I think 4 million people have left Venezuela of late. That's phenomenal, because that country should be steady, should be stable.
Yeah,
and
both are tragic.
Difficult.
Yeah, both are tragic for very different reasons, but they truly are. And I think you may have made this point, but it comes back to human greed. In both cases,
Absolutely.
I think. And
Yeah,
I know what people are saying with Venezuela, or there's the American interference and the like, but ultimately there's the groundwork was set for what's going on over there in the late 80s. It's been going on now for a very long time over in poor old Venezuela, and it's not the ruling class or being the political elite that feel it, it's the mum and dads that feel it the most, and that's where it's bullshit.
And the children.
That's what I mean. The mum and dads and the families. Sorry, I mean to say it's horrendous that they're the ones that feel the brunt of this stuff, and yet there doesn't seem to be a mechanism. The problem is that these things happen, and yet they keep on happening. Okay, so they happened in the past. We're talking about Venezuela and Zimbabwe now, but how many times has that been repeated around the world? Okay, look at people in North Korea who are malnourished and they apparently, I've got to fact check this one here. I'm sure it's true though, because I've heard a lot of people talk about it. But if you stuff up in the eyes of the government, it affects 2 or 3 generations. So that's how they keep you in check. That's ridiculous. So you could do it accidentally.
But that's power, isn't it? It's power. This comes back to power. So this again is the key factor here is politics and power. Because if you make the rule, it's like in WA we're all about mining, and in mining it's a golden rule. If you've got the gold, you make the rules.
So we're here in Queensland.
That's the reality of what goes on. Yeah, you got the same thing. So once you've got that kind of influence, you never want to give it up. You'll do whatever, and this comes back to the politicians. How do we ensure that we don't? Because if you had a look, 15 years ago, you wouldn't have called Zimbabwe up. They were just fantastic. What a strong country, and then wiped out within 3 to 4 years.
Oh no, there was signs there. I went through. I went through a boarding school in Sydney, and we used to have people from Zimbabwe arrive in the 80s and 90s, and they'd tell us what was going on, and it was never pleasant. And it was, that's what I'm talking about with Venezuela, with the groundwork. Just, it doesn't happen overnight. It just, you see these things, and then was it Martin Luther King that said it? When good people stand around when bad things are happening, that's when you got real catastrophe. I'm paraphrasing massively here.
Yeah.
But it's that thing that you cannot allow the political elite to get away with their bullshit. It's just, they Jordan Peterson said it really well, which is with all of this stuff that's going on these days. In college campuses and universities in the States and North America in general. But you see, the equivalent of 100 miles, if we're going to use that sort of metric or methodology of explaining how you see ground to political forces, if you like, and you just keep on going back, and before you know it, you've gone a mile, and then you've gone 2 miles and 3 miles. It doesn't ever stop, and it really is up to people to make uncomfortable decisions on behalf of other people and say, no, we're not going to do this. We can't do this. And there definitely will be sacrificial lambs in that process. But I can't think of any other way that we as humanity, we get around things. We're still so bloody primitive in that regard, aren't we? Where we seem to need Big Daddy above us. You see it in religion. We need a God. We need a political master, don't we?
And believe you me, God comes up in my songs. It's the same, and also no one wants the war to finish. There's a lot of money to be made out of war. That the point of war is you don't want it to finish. It can change location, but don't let it finish. Because if it stops, all those people, what are they going to do? What? Yeah. And again, it's like faith. What a tool to keep everybody in check. Throw 10 shekels in the cup, my man. Believe, and that again, it's the power. It's the greed of whatever. Everything comes down to power. Everything comes down to greed. And like you say, if we don't rail against it constantly, we will end up being submersed. We can't afford that as a country. We can't afford it as humanity. And it is difficult to stop, because what happens, and there's a song coming up where I talk about the fact that what would happen. In fact, there was a part of it spoke on Watergate, one of the earlier releases. If you were culpable, your family paid that price.
Yeah, like North Korea.
North Korea, but it's the other way, which says, I find you as a politician guilty, and for your sins, your family pay.
Yeah.
So it reverses out. Instead of it as a tool for the powerful to reign over the masses, it gets pushed the other way. And that was there was a couple of sentences to that in Watergate, which I think was April's song. And it really speaks to that, like what, and the point being, what does it take to get the honesty from these folks? How do we get that? Like a bit of jail time, is that going to hurt? What happens if you did that and it was your wife that ended up in jail, or your children? Would they keep you in line? Would the thought of them, or is there, and I'm quite sure there's people out there just wouldn't really care either. It is, it's all collateral damage at some point.
Well, I think it human nature is a very broad spectrum, okay, and even in single families. So just say you've got two parents and they have three kids. Even within that small example, you're going to get a very broad cross section of ideas, if you like, that occur natively. And this is not even environmental. This is nature versus nurture. This is nature. And how do you control that? We're still. This is where people, and this will sound like a broad jump, so I hope it doesn't. But this is where people get into the whole alien bullshit. And they say, well, you know where I'm headed, right? They start saying, well, who the hell created this? If it wasn't God, what irrational being created this? Because we can't figure things out, even in a family environment. I mean, a lot of families break up. It's just a fact. And I'm not talking about parents. I'm talking about how common is it for brothers and sisters to not talk to each other again? It's very common. It's very common to have that happen. And we're basically just chimps. Humanity is basically just advanced primates. And we just haven't quite got to the point where we figured out, beyond bullshit corporate speak, win-win, or at least not zero-sum. At least not that. But we seem to be determined with, it must be biologically hard-settedness to want to have an advantage over the rest of humanity because it means that we're somewhere further on up the food chain and we're less likely to be killed or something. I don't know. It's a very strange...
Well, if you've got money, you can afford to eat. If you've got money, you can afford power, as an electricity. And then on top of that, you've also got the other side that if typically the meek will inherit bugger all, So if you do go for
the meek don't inherit the earth.
And you sit there, then eventually you're going to end up to be Tibet. It's like, well done, you guys.
Yeah, Stuart Wilde talked about that.
There is that self-preservation, isn't there? It's like, how do I preserve? I surround myself with things that will allow me to come out on top when other people are losing, will allow me to ensure that my family is looked after above all and at the detriment of everyone else in the village. In fact, let's burn that village and I'll take the lot. There's no way around that, because you're always trying to do better than the generation before you. You're trying to, it's that whole striving, and it's because we can. If you go to a country where you can't, then the happiness is in the one book you have to read, and you'll read it again and again. Right now we've got technology which says that, nothing happens that isn't known within 4 or 5 minutes. So there's a bit where the constant information stream allows you to make choices that previously you would have had to do a lot of digging and a lot of figuring, as opposed to countries where there is no choice. There is nothing. You wake up, you've got a patch of ground, hopefully you got some water and hopefully you got some seed, and then God help us if it rains. And, you've got a massive, and it goes back again to the album. At the moment, there's global issues, and some of them are climate. There's a 75%, I read the other day, of the third, what they call the third pole, which is through the Alps. That's melting horrifically at the moment, and all that, the melt from that feeds into all of the surrounding countries. What happens when that ceases to exist? Those people get thirsty, those people leave. What happens when they leave? Where do they go, and what's the impact on not only where they go, but the people? And all of a sudden, you've got the similar to Africa through to Europe. You've got that same problem. Suddenly, the caravan going up through Mexico into America, people are leaving because they can't stay. That's a terrible state of affairs. And how bad does it have to be where you decide, you look around whatever you call your house and you pack them all into one bag, and you may have to leave 100 times what you put in that bag behind. This is what we're railing against. This is what premeditated is all about. This is saying, people, be aware that you may look around and you might say to yourself, hey, look at these guys. Why are they coming to our country? Or why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? but they actually may not have a choice. You know, persecution is, how do you live with persecution?
What I think it is too is in a lot of Western countries, we don't have what you would equate to persecution as you would have it in a lot of developing countries, meaning that when we describe persecution, it basically means wrongful conviction, your lawyer didn't argue your case well enough, that sort of thing. But generally speaking, there's been a whole heap of events that have led up to that point. Persecution in, say, parts of South America, in a lot of the Middle East and the like, you can just be, as I say, you've said before, a regular bloke or a mum with a family, and someone knocks at your door and says, "Come with us," and you know it means you're in deep shit, but you have no idea what it actually means. But that's the difference, isn't it? There's no calibration.
Not.
Yeah. Well, there's no calibration between the two, isn't it? We don't really have persecution on that basis in Australia. We truly don't. People will go, yeah, we do, there's this example, but we really don't. Okay, like I'm not worrying tonight when I go to sleep that someone's going to knock on the door at 3 o'clock in the morning and take my kids. It won't happen. But in other countries, it does happen. And I don't want to give specific examples.
I think there's levels of it here. There is levels of persecution, but it's not that complete stripping away of your humanity.
Yeah.
You know, so there, and even the levels here are isolated incidents in some areas. So they're probably more. And I'll say this, that people are generally working harder to stop persecution now than they were in Australia, wherever that may be, whether it's within the various communities across Australia who are deemed to be different. And persecution comes in the form of racism or any colour you like. You know, but it's definitely not, as you say, where some of the other countries, and obviously we won't go to those, but it really is a whole different ballgame here. And this is why keeping our politicians honest, keeping ourselves honest, keeping the people, whether it's the police force or whoever, honest, so that I guess they need to do what they need to do, but they need to be transparent and they have to have rules. They need to follow them. And I think that's the bit that, you know, it's always difficult. Like you say, if there's 3 siblings in a family, they are all different. And if there's a gentleman that's in the police force and he is different, he may do something that's wrong, but that doesn't make the police force wrong. You know, there's that whole isolated incident area.
Yeah, the worst example of us is not emblematic of the rest of us. That's a really good point you're making there. Yeah, that's so, and that's what I hate on Twitter in particular, the catastrophizing. How terrible! It's like someone says,
news, same thing.
You would find the conversation that we've had that there would be people that would classify themselves as, broadly speaking, politically active, that would disagree with 90% of what we just said and said, how dare you say that? It's so bad in this country here. And it's like, hang on, have you travelled? Like my wife's half Filipino. We've been to where kids don't have much and they rely, they're absolutely dependent. Okay, I haven't been, I'll reframe that. Okay, I haven't been there personally, but we know that they exist because my wife's family work in with them and help them. Okay, but where they're completely dependent, there's not like welfare in the Philippines. Like, you know, like if you don't have money, you're relying on charity, Christian charity for the most part, to actually help you.
That is the Red Cross. That is the
Salvation Army,
Médecins, etc. That are
Médecins Sans Frontières,
globally trying to bring we've become back to Venezuela, don't we? There's truckloads trying to get in there to hand out medicine and food. You know, clean water. And this is what, it comes down to. This is where we have to keep everyone honest. We have to stay on track to make sure that if we're going to survive as a nation, and God forbid we're going to bring people in from other nations, we have to be able to do that. You know, we will get called on to do it more and more because there's whole areas of the planet that are really struggling, as I said, whether it's politically, whether it's economically, whether it is the climate. There's all manner of issues coming on, and they are looking for somewhere where, on the whole, and I mean 99.9% recurring, these people just want water, house, food, electricity. You know, they're not asking for a hell of a lot because when you got nothing, anything is better. So how do we help this? Can we help? I'm quite sure we can. How do we do it? We've got to be, like you say, we've got to be strong, we've got to be progressive, and we've got to believe that we are here for humanity as opposed to being here to, I guess, take from humanity. And that's the church and the state on the whole, they don't believe in that because those individuals are pulled by power. So how can we do that? We keep shining a light in the darkness, I think. That's what we can do.
Shining a light in the darkness. That's a good one right there.
Imagine that. Yeah. Imagine that.
Mate, we better...
you find in the corner.
I'd better wrap things up, mate, to be honest, because it's getting a bit on for me. But I know we've talked a lot about heaps of other things, but I think it's really important that, but from the perspective that you're an artist and you got an opinion and you shared an opinion, I want to thank you for doing that, because I think it's important that when you've got one, you feel comfortable doing that. So you've done that here, and you've got some... I didn't realise that you were releasing a single every month, like you were saying earlier there, but Liquidate, I think in particular, is a very strong song, mate. So congratulations on that one. That was your single for June, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so we had Liquidate was January. We had Candidate was the main single for April. We've got Validate coming in the end of July, and that'll be the last main single. But every month we have a track. We've done, as we said, we've done Real Estate, Water Date, we've done Inundated, and we've got Accommodate coming next. And musically, you'll find that the songs are getting a little bit, there's a bit more rock being added in towards this end of the album, as we would like to think of it. And it is, and I guess I just want to say on that side of it as well, Rob is our guitarist and Matt plays drums. We've got Kendra on the vocals, and we're all working very hard to become better musicians. We're working on our craft and we're trying to do it, and doing what you're doing and actually putting a light on us is appreciated by us, and I think by a lot of musicians.
Cool.
Because it can be a thankless task when you're doing and you're toiling.
That it can be.
And we all know. I mean, it's not a bad task. I mean, there's worse hobbies to have. God knows we all know about those. But we also appreciate what you guys do, because it's without that we literally are just playing for the animals.
Well, thank you, mate. Yeah, because it can be. I sometimes feel like that myself, to be honest, man. I get a couple of hundred listens per episode, and the wonderful thing, though, is that a lot of my audience, most of my audience, I must say, is in the United States. So I feel like as though I'm shining a light on Australian artists for the North American audience. So I hope that translates into some success for you, even if one or two sort of feel comfortable reaching, or, they can find you via Facebook. And that'll be my final question for you, is for anybody listening who wants to get in touch with you and wants to check out your socials, how can they do that?
Yeah, so we've got on Facebook, we've got The Date. On Instagram, we're under Master Date, which was our last album, so master_date. Obviously, we've got www.thedate.com.au, and basically, if you type in the word The Date Perth, you'll find us.
Seems fairly straightforward, so thank you, mate. Thank you so much for the conversation. It's been a broad chat, and I really appreciate that. As I say, You have been listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast series that syndicates for the A-List Online. My name is Andrew Mackay-Smith, and that interview subject was David Moran from the Perth outfit, The Date. Thanks so much for listening.